Okay, so this is the third section of information system auditing ISA methodology. So let's go into it. Right? So information system auditing methodology. It's basically what in earth is methodology. Basically, methodology are steps to do something. So you got a goal, steps to do a goal is called methodology. So basically, what this whole thing is saying is what are the steps to do an audit. Literally, that's the thing. So there's going to be four phases, right? Now let's see. Phase one. So now we're into phase one. Phase one obviously is going to be very easy. So phase one is audit planning, right? So audit planning, what you need to do is plan the audit, right? So you can't just start an audit. You have to plan the audit. To plan the audit, there's very simple way. You do something called a audit charter, right? Now the audit charter, it's done so it tells you what the auditor needs to do. So all the objectives of an audit, right? Audit as a whole, what it needs to do, what are the objectives, what is the limitations, what the auditor cannot do, right? It also does what the key performance indicates in audit evaluation process and the stage. So basically it looks at everything in the audit, right? What are things, what are vulnerabilities, what are the threats in the business, what controls the business has in place. So an audit charter basically has everything that the auditor needs to know to do the audit, right? Now the audit charter should clearly specify the authority assigned to information system auditors with relation to risk assessment. Mm, audit in relation to risk assessments, clearly specify authority assigned. Okay, so the audit charter needs to clearly assign the auditor to what to do, right? That's basically what you're trying to say. There's going to be limitations. For example, the client's functions need to be audited with the audit expectations. So basically, very sensitive data in the business needs to be limited. The auditor can't look at those data. So yeah. The audit charter should clearly identify reporting lines, assessment of compliance, and agreed actions. So the auditor is going to look at the audit charter and agree with everything. Okay, the manager is the business side, so they give the auditor the audit charter. So now you need to know what's a letter of representation. So an audit charter is given to the auditor, but a letter of representation is done by the management. The reason why the manager does the letter of representation is the manager accepts their responsibility of implementing the control. So in the letter of representation, they basically tell the auditor that, listen here, I'm in charge of implementing all these controls. I want you to check it. They also give the auditor what he needs to know. They can't lie to the auditor. If there are things that the business is doing wrong, he needs to tell the auditor. So he'll basically tell this in the letter of representation. So we're done with phase one. Now we need to do phase two. Now phase two of the risk assessment and risk management. Now risk assessment and risk management is two completely different things. Risk assessment. So there we go. Risk assessment, which is one. It's basically looking at the risk and identifying everything that is in, basically identifying the risks. Huh? You're looking at the risk, analyzing the risk, evaluating the risk. You're not doing anything to put the risk away. You do that in risk management. So risk management is processing of identifying and assessing the risk as well as taking steps to reduce it. There we go. So 3 words: identifying and assessing the risk and taking a reasonable step to reduce it. That's the most important thing besides management and assessment. Management, you're managing the risk, active steps, you're doing the risk, taking the risk out. Risk assessment is just looking at what the risk is, how the risk is affecting everything, just basically all the information you get for the risk. So now the objective of performing a risk management, right, is obviously to better secure systems data, enable management to make well risk management decisions, assisting management in authorizing information systems on basis of supporting documentation. So management obviously will help the controls to be better, stronger, put in place to protect the business. Huh? So once you got the risk right, you can either manage it into 4 categories. Huh? Avoidance, supposed to be avoidance. These things are all cut off. It's avoidance. Avoidance means You need to completely get rid of the risk. If there's a risk involved, you avoid it. You take it out from your path, literally. Mitigation is reduce it. So I told you mitigation, reduce. The next one is transfer. So you got a risk in the business, you make sure you maybe like put in an insurance company. So insurance company will be in charge of that risk, right? And then the last one, avoidance, it's retention, I think. Yeah, retention. Retention means you just ignore that anything happened. You just keep the risk. Types of risk. Now there's three types of risks. Okay, inherent risk. Inherent risks are risks that the business has without implementing controls. So let's say you're a new business and you have no knowledge what its controls are. All the risks that you have in the business are called inherent risks. Control risks are risks which you have are basically a control, but you still have risks. So if you look at it, it's basically a control you have in the business, but it's something, there's errors, like the control is not good, there's still people stealing money. That's what happens when that's control risk. So control risk is there is a control, but there's still risk to it. Detection risk is deals with the auditor. These two are above. Control risk and inherent risk deals with the business. Detection risk deals with the auditor. So the auditor will audit the work. Detection risk is basically what is the risk that the auditor never audit the work properly. What is the risk that the auditor issues a statement that is false? For example, he says everything is good with the business, but what happens if it's wrong? That's detection risk. Audit risk is a calculation. Audit risk is equal to inherent risk times control risk times detection risk. What you might say is happening here, very easy. Audit risk is what the risk needs to be in a auditor like thing. Okay, so you're a business, right? You want your audit risk to be 0.9, right? If your inherent risk is 0.3 and your control risk is 0.2, with your calculation solve for x, you need to determine what a detection risk is. Therefore, knowing what the detection risk is, knowing what the detection risk is, the auditor will do that detection risk. Because the auditor can't be 100% sure everything's right in the business. He do sampling, getting information from the business and testing it to see if it's right. He can't test everything in the business. So this audit risk equation will help him to know how many documents he needs to audit. The more documents he audits, the less the detection risk is. So obviously, once you know these three variables, you know what detection risk the auditor should apply, right? Effects of risk. Risks can either be controllable risks. Controllable risks are risks that you can control, right? You can mitigate these risks, reduce the risk. Uncontrollable risks are external to the business, you can't control. Influential are external, but you can control, right? Now, risk assessment, I told you, is about looking at all the risk and making all details to the risks, right? What are the risks? Everything, how to do these risks, how to solve them, the risks, how to remove them, all, etc. So the first stage, system characterization. You look at your business system. You need to make sure what are the system. Do you get computers in your business? Do you have hardware? Do you have software? What are the stuff in the business that you have, right? You're looking at the data. What data you have? The critically data means important data. Sensitivity data means data that is confidential, data that is important security reasons. Threat identification. Look at the threat, right? You need to understand what the threat is in the business. Vulnerability identification, need to know what our weaknesses are in the business that can be taken advantage of. Control analysis, right? Control analysis is looking at all controls in the business and making sure they're doing what it should be doing, right? You have to list all the controls in the business, look at all the controls that the business has. Likelihood determination, you need to look at the likelihood of something being bad in the business, right? So you need to look at the controls and say what is the likelihood that that control is not doing good in the business. If it's 10, that's a high likelihood, it's not doing well, that's bad. Impact analysis. So impact analysis deals with these four: mission statement, critically assessment, data critical, data sensitivity. Impact rating is looking at the total impact that having all this has in the business, right? It can have a negative impact because you can lose integrity, lose availability, lose confidentiality if this information gets leaked. Risk determination. determines the risks that the business has with the associated risk level, right? So if the business has a certain risk level as 0.9, you look at all the risks. Control recommendations, look at different controls that the business must implement, the new controls. Risk results documentation. It basically, after all the risk assessment, you do a risk assessment report. So it tells you all the risks that it identified, everything basically you mentioned above. Um, a risk-based approach. So when you're doing an audit, right, and let's say you want to know what are the high risk in the business, the majority risk, the very high risk in the business, you do a risk-based approach. Identify major sub-processes. You identify processes in the business. For example, transaction process happening, customer coming in the business, that process. Document key activities related. You document what's happening in those systems. Identify issues with the system. For example, the system that the transaction system is not doing good because so many errors, it can be hacked and so on. Do a compliance test. Look at the system is doing well. Test whether the controls in place are doing well. Test whether the controls are effective. Access the risk and document the risk, and develop an audit program. So basically what you're doing is this whole process looks at all the high risks, analyze the high risks, look at how controls to prevent these high risks, and do a document. That document tell them how to audit those risks or the controls to put in place. I just literally said the whole thing now. So identify areas that are high inherent risk, all that, right? Okay. Business process analysis. I told you look at the process in the business, you look at the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities, the threats, and so on. Right? Conceptual foundation, audit and risk. Yeah, so audit and risk, right? So when you're auditing risk, you need to know that you need to do a risk analysis, obviously looking at all the risk, like what are the risks and so on. You need to implement the risk assessment process, right? So auditors need to keep in mind, this is very important, that individual managers have different attitudes towards risk. One manager you might have is a big risk, that manager don't care. So different managers will care, some won't care, and so on, right? Now, audit evidence. As I told you before, when you need to do evidence, right? Just auditing alone. You need evidence to do your conclusions, right? So these evidence fall into different categories. Sufficient. If the audit evidence is sufficient, it means it's very, very good evidence that someone else, if you give them the evidence, they'll come to the same conclusion. Competent. It's reliable. You got it from a reliable source with appropriate techniques. Relevant. It supports the findings, right, in the recommendations. So it's very, very relevant evidence, because what you're auditing, it's like basically that. If you're auditing a computer, whether it's hackers, and you find hackers, evidence to support this hacking is relevant because hackers are related to the computer you're auditing. Useful, obviously, it must help the organization. Right? Now, there's different types of evidence categories. Okay, physical evidence is evidence you can touch. Right? You can touch people. Okay, that's a bad example, but touch people. You know what I mean, physical evidence, and you can talk to people, look at how many vehicles are there in the business, that's physical evidence. Testimonial is when people speak, statements, response. Documentary evidence are documents, so documents like your computer documents in your files, you can use that. Analytical evidence are evidence of past experiences, so comparing financial year sales figure from last year, this year, analytical. Audit evidence procedures. To get the audit or to get the evidence for the audit, you need to follow procedures, right? Now, basically what this whole thing is saying, the auditor relies heavily on gathering evidence, right? And he has to follow the audit program, and those are the steps that the auditor needs to do to complete the audit, right? Now, 3.3, phase 3, performance of audit work. Now, performance of audit work. Okay, we discussed all these just now down. So when you're performing audit work, right, you need to do supervision. Now, why? So when an auditor does audit work, he needs to be supervised, because at the end of the day, you have to make sure if he's been doing the things that are correct, right? So gathering audit and documenting audit work. Yeah. So the whole audit work itself needs to be supervised, making sure all the audit is going in place and so on. Now, control objectives for information. Okay, so COBIT, right? Whenever they talk about, let me see, IT management. IT management, the government's here is called COBIT, right? COBIT, control objective for information related technology. These relates to technology, which is the IT management, right? So it makes sure it looks at all the technical issues, anything related to technology, right? To look at the technology using is good in the business, making sure that you have security in the technology using, making sure the technology using is very very good. There is 34 control objectives in this COBIT, right? Now, IT governance. So everything you see IT is COBIT, right? IT governance. Such thing IT governance covers the following: planning of organization, information resources, how resources are planned in the business of technology. Monitoring. Okay, so you can pause and read. But basically, it basically makes sure your technology is used in the business efficiently, right? You need to be used efficiently. You need to be used effectively. You need to be utilized, so used and accessed, including facilities, support, delivery. So you must just be used. It can't be technology be sitting around in the business. So you got a IT government governance information. So you're gonna see how everything is related to all your resources in the business being used effectively, your technology in the business. So yeah, that's basically it. So your IT. So it's basically everything your technology in the business that you're having that you do good. Now, very important, application no control review, right? Application control review, you need to really understand what this means. In your computer, you have applications, right? You might not call it applications, but it's applications. Word is an application. A game on a computer is an application. Let's say you're a business and you need to do something. You have an application to help you. For example, Excel. Now you need to test if Excel is working properly. This is application control review, right? Now, application control review will control the effectiveness. So, is my app working as I planned? Is it safe? Is there security? Is it performance as expected? Right. So basically, when testing, when anytime they give you this multiple choice application control review, it's going to be everything. You need to look at where the data is coming from, the input, transmission, processing, output. Right? Transmission. It's basically it's like deals with like security of information. You need to know the person putting data into Excel is good. Data coming off Excel is good. Process the Excel itself or app is good. So everything related to that, right? CATS, CATTS, user computer aided audit techniques. When you use a computer to do some audit work for an auditor, that's what CAT is, right? Now, CAT can do these things, so you can read it. Very simple, right? It can do some audit work for you. Uh, okay, the major steps is undertaken by the information system auditor in preparing for the application of the selected CATs. Yeah. So you have to set what you need for the CATs to work, for the computers to work, so you know what to audit, right? Define the procedures, what the computer must do, can do sampling, statistic sampling, stats, right? Define what it needs. Basically telling the computer, okay, I need you to audit a certain thing. Tell me, I'm basically all this is telling me what to put in that system, the computer. Telling it this is what it must do at the end of the day. Give me this audit, give me that thing, test this system, give me system, to give me stats or whatever. Phase 4 is reporting. So after you, so phase 1 is planning the audit. Phase 2 was information management and information assessment. Audit assessment, audit management. Third one is to do the actual audit. Now the fourth one is reporting. After you do everything, right, you need to provide audit evidence. When you do your conclusion, recommendation, identify the scope that was did, what you did in the audit, identify organizations, identify everything that you did in the business, follow up activities. Any recommendation made by the auditor, which is in the audit report, must be followed up by management. Management can either do the following: accept the risk and take no further action, take an appropriate and they do control the weakness, they control the risk, they take no action and leave the weakness as an unacceptable risk. Audit evaluation. So the final stage, which the audit evaluation is essential self-assessment control made by the auditors themselves of each project. Okay, so audit evaluation is basically every single thing we discussed. At each step the auditor does when he's auditing, he'll do an evaluation. Evaluation is what you audited, what you did in audited, what you found out, what stuff. Basically every single thing. Audit evaluation. Evaluate means everything. Oh, I'm tired, man. And that's number 3 done.